Welcome, everybody. This is Kyle Yates here, the host today on the Second Shot Beyond the Ball series. Talking to a lot of thought leaders in sports, getting beyond just the on-court stuff. Today, I got an awesome guest. Happy to chat. I've already been a big fan of the YouTube channel, Building Pickleball. So we got the founder, Brian Lim, here today. Brian, how you doing?
Great, man. Thanks for having me.
Oh, this is going to be fun. So tell us a little bit about yourself, because I'm looking – ex-pro MMA fighter, software developer, and now you're making pickleball YouTube videos. What's going on?
Yeah. Was never really good at focusing on just one thing. So I've had random careers. It was like the pro MMA, UX, UI designer. I was a pastry cook. And now I feel like I found something that I actually enjoy that's like keeping my attention, which is pretty rare for me. So I feel like I'm in a good spot.
Man, okay, so man, many talents. What did it all start with? I mean, what sports you grew up playing? What led you to pickleball eventually?
Oh, maybe the fact that I wasn't actually good at sports actually led me to pickleball. I never got into sports growing up. I was always into like weightlifting though. So I started that at like 15 years old. Just had like a really good high school gym coach. And then after that, like so many random things. Like in college, I majored with a Bachelor of Science in Nutrition and Dietetics. And then once I graduated, had no idea what I wanted to do. So I got into sales and recruiting. Obviously was not the greatest choice because I just kind of followed what everyone else kind of said to do, and kind of the kind of like standard for post grads. And then let's see, MMA is that's the one I picked up in college. I picked up jiu-jitsu. That was always like my first love. It was jiu-jitsu first, but always had the plan of becoming a professional MMA fighter. Just watched UFC fights, pride fights with my brother growing up, and just thought it would be really cool. Just thought like it looked like a really good challenge. Looked like you could be held at such a high regard if you were a professional MMA fighter. If you could go through that, if you could endure the challenges of developing the skills, and also just, I mean, how much tougher does it really get, right? It's like only 3 of you in the cage. It's you, your opponent, and the ref, and only like one person's really walking out. And did that for 5 years, and was like pretty lost for a little while, but I was like a personal trainer as well. And then moved to Austin right when I retired. I moved to Austin. So I moved from Maryland to Austin, Texas in 2018. Kind of the same kind of idea, just still lost. So I was doing like tech support for Flow Sports, was a pastry cook, and then became a UX designer. Jumped into like this boot camp course. It's a 10-week course, and was just interested in technology. Read Steve Jobs's biography by Walter Isaacson, just intrigued by how much change someone could bring about, or like what a piece of technology could do to facilitate change. And I think technology is one of the quickest ways to do it. So I got into the tech space, and I realized there's so many things that went through my head when I realized I didn't want to work for anyone else anymore. But I think 2 main things was, one, like didn't want to work for anyone else. Like what would happen if I pursued this on my own? And 2 was, who would this force me to become if I became an entrepreneur? I don't know if being a YouTuber is technically an entrepreneur, but I am trying to pursue that whole gamut of business through it.
Sure it is.
Sorry, I've been rambling on.
Absolutely it is. So you were a MMA fighting pastry chef. So what do you still fight, and do you still cook?
No, I gave it up. I hung up the gloves in 2018, but I still train jiu-jitsu every once in a while. So I got to give obviously a shout out and a lot of credit to my jiu-jitsu coach, Greg Souders, because actually a lot of what this conversation is going to be about is mostly due to him. So much of it is due to him. Just his mentorship, the teaching, the foundation he's building at Standard Jiu-Jitsu. So like I'm like 1% of the knowledge that I'm going to share on this. Greg is like miles above me. He's become a legitimate like thought leader in the space of jiu-jitsu. He's changing the way people practice. He's changing the way people develop skill, changing coaching, changing gyms, the ideologies. changing the way people approach jujitsu. So yeah, so let's see that. And I pastry cook. I don't do it anymore. Every once in a while, if I like you a lot, then I'll make you something good. But I generally stay out of the kitchen now.
What's if you got to fix one to impress somebody, what's your go-to?
Some like crazy cake. Yeah.
Cake guy.
Like cake. I'll do like a cake. It's like simple, but you can make it look like it took a lot of time, you know?
That's amazing. All right. Well, going back to your jiu-jitsu coach, because I know I've had some coaches across my sports career that were super impactful, and I know firsthand how important that is. I've had some great coaches, I've had some bad coaches, and just the kind of thoughts that they can kind of put in your head and kind of feed, right? They plant some seeds, and that kind of evolves and gives you a different perspective of what you're doing. I think that's really powerful. And I think, especially right now in my sport with pickleball, you're getting a lot of kids and younger people, younger athletes getting into pickleball, and you can tell the ones who have had really good coaching and mentoring and the ones that haven't, in a lot of different ways, not just just behavior on court, but just the way that they see the game and they play and practice. And that's kind of one of the things I wanted to get talking with you about, because like I said, I was a big fan with your YouTube videos, and you get a lot deeper into some of these things. You get to more of the cerebral side of sports, where a lot of people think they just train really hard and practice a bunch. It's just automatically gonna show itself, and that's not always the case. I don't think people take into account how important the mental side of all sports really are, and especially in a sport like pickleball. You come from MMA, which seems a lot more. It would seem a lot more intense to me. I've never been trapped in a cage with a guy. I'm not really planning on doing it anytime soon. Pickleball seems a lot safer, but very, very mental, as much as it is physical. So that's what I really want to get in with you today. One of the videos that I really liked from yours was about the theory of reinvestment. And in the video, you state the definition of the theory of reinvestment was a conscious control, planning and executing a movement using deliberate mental effort. And I wanted to talk about that because I feel like a lot of people, they go and practice things over and over and over again. They get that mental, that muscle memory, but there are so many variables in sports that being able to identify changes or things to do different that maybe is outside your comfort zone and be able to execute that properly. But it does take a little bit of stepping outside of what you're comfortable with. And that doesn't just apply to sports, but outside, off the court as well. I think sometimes people get stuck in that day-to-day, that flow, just going through the motions. Sometimes life can just push you in a certain direction, but being able to decide exactly the path you want to go down and make a conscious, deliberate mental effort to go down a certain path, or to recognize something in game, like this pattern isn't working, I need to try this instead. Is that kind of along the lines of what you were talking about? I mean, does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely, man. You're like nailing it. And you're also speaking a lot to like the side of skill development that like the ecological approach that's why the ecological approach has become very popular and become a very viable or popular option in skill development, because there's the two, right? There's like traditional approach, which you're probably very familiar with both of them, but the traditional approach is rote repetition. Someone's going to be
I finished your videos. I studied this video, but for the other listeners that maybe haven't yet, maybe quick definition for them.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, you nailed everything, but there's the two I think most popular routes for skill development. The first is the traditional approach, which is you're going to stand there with a coach. The coach is going to demonstrate a technique, and then they're going to use a lot of internal focusing cues. They're going to tell you like, bend your wrist this way, bend your knees this way, like 90 degrees, turn your body this way. And then they're going to have you repeat that over and over and over again through rote memorization. And it's usually just isolated, this one practice. You're going to isolate this one movement for like an hour long, and they're just going to feed you balls. That's like one side of it. The other option, another route you can go, is the ecological approach. And yeah, man, when you were talking about your game and your development, I can't help but think of how crafty you are in your game and what you've developed over time, that I don't know what your practices look like, but I am very curious. But there is like the ecological approach, right? So you present a problem and you allow that person to self-organize around the problem themselves. And if you were to give them cues, ideally you want to give them external facing cues, things where they are not so focused on their body per se, but they're more focused on the outcome or the effect that they want to produce. And then in the ecological approach, they usually use like a game-based approach. So everything is very much like game-based or situational or game-based. And that's not to say that the two have to live exclusively or like the two can't be merged together. They definitely can be. Everyone learns differently, right? But if we were to kind of connect this to the theory of reinvestment, in the research that was like written by Richard Masters, and other researchers, they talk about how reinvestment generally occurs more frequently to those who learned explicitly. And explicit learning versus implicit learning. So like explicit learning is the traditional route, right? Where someone told you how to position everything and like how to move your body. So that's as soon as like they might miss a shot through an unforced error, that's what they're thinking about. They're thinking of like, what did my coach tell me this way versus that way? Versus what you kind of touched on is, how do you become an adaptable problem solver? How can you were talking about a pattern. You're like, okay, if this pattern doesn't work, what do I need to change? That already says so much about the way you developed your skill. So like in a live real-time scenario, how are you going to solve that problem? Are you going to think back to how you were taught explicitly or how you learned something implicitly, and then becoming an adaptable problem solver? Like, okay, maybe I need to change like this or that. So yeah, it's kind of a ramble, but yeah.
Yeah, it makes perfect sense. I feel like there's a lot of that in pickleball, especially in all sports, but for some reason, pickleball especially, because there are a lot of different styles and strengths and weaknesses from players. And over the course of my career, especially back in the day where there were less tennis players, there were so many different styles, different grips, weird shots, and you had to be unpredictable. Nowadays, the game's evolved a little bit now where people are still fairly predictable, but they execute it at such a high level, it's hard to stop anyways. But being a guy who I'm not the biggest, strongest guy in the world, I certainly wasn't the best tennis player on the court. When I'm playing pickleball against players who I felt like were actually inherently better than me, you've got to get a little bit crafty to be able to pull off the win. So I do feel like I've been able to beat opponents that were better than me simply by just trying to finesse and outsmart and play as tactical as possible. And that was kind of one of the things that I loved about pickleball so much, was the strategy aspect of it, the creativity. And I think, and I'm not surprised that you've kind of gotten attracted to pickleball as well, and you probably think in a similar mindset, because someone who maybe grew up playing a lot of different sports, doing a lot of different things, like you mentioned, I think having that creativity in your brain really helps in a sport like pickleball, where a lot of the points tend to look the same, but you do have to throw in a little bit of your own style and think on your feet a little bit. I mean, I'm sure that's the same in a lot of sports. Jiu-jitsu, I'm sure it's the same way. You've got to make decisions quickly, and you've got to adapt. So I did want to touch a little bit too on one of your videos. You talked about choking, why players choke, and man, I've seen that so much. I can't say that I know from firsthand experience what that's like. Thank goodness. I've certainly have had times where I felt tight in matches, and I want to say that the only times that I've ever been nervous or didn't perform my best or was afraid to play was after a period of time where maybe I wasn't training and playing as much as I'm used to, or maybe I hadn't practiced a ton, or let's say I didn't really work on my serve before tournament, or I didn't really work on my backhand drop before tournament, and then all of a sudden I get into a big point and I forget how to do it all of a sudden, or I start overthinking it and I try to force it to go where it needs to go. And it's hard sometimes as an athlete. You get in that flow state where everything is just, you don't have to think. You're just hitting all the shots, making all the right decisions, and everything's going great. And then all of a sudden, something happens and you start thinking like, oh, I need to roll that ball a little more on the next one. You start like micromanaging and analyze everything way too much. I mean, what is that like in our psychology that happens? Because you had a great video on it, and I really agree. But just for everyone listening, I mean, what is it that causes us to get the yips or to choke or to overthink in these big moments?
Dude, that's a great way to put it. Micromanaging yourself. Like, yeah, they say a lot of things. They say like the reward of sport can cause choking. So if there's a huge prize, if even even if you're in a
There's
pool
something
play,
on the line.
yeah, something on the
Yeah.
line. Yeah. Um, the rewards of sports, if your coach believes that you choke in performance, then that will have a negative effect on you and cause a like sudden and significant decline in performance. So even that could cause it. I think something I didn't look into enough was probably just social physical anxiety, and like confidence. And yeah, it's very interesting. They looked at two different cultures. There wasn't The research isn't heavily developed in this, but they did mention it in one of the studies. So you look at Western culture, and they said like Americans tend to choke when they're spoken to negatively. If they use negative self-talk, they don't perform very well. They don't respond to that well. And then they looked at Eastern cultures, like primarily Asians, and then they found that negative self-talk actually helped them to perform better. I myself could probably like totally see where that comes from. So like I'm like, okay, that kind of does make sense, just like through the parenting and the culture of like Asian culture. But I could completely see that. Yeah, just I think, and another thing again is going back to that implicit and explicit knowledge and learning is if you like cause an unforced error and you're like, man, maybe I need to move my wrist a little bit more, that in itself is just going to cause choking. So opposed to just instead of thinking internally about like your body movement and like uh yeah, how you want to position your body, think externally, think of the outcome that you want or the effect or the desired effect that you want. So that's that external focus of attention, which so yeah.
Sure. And especially for a lot of really good players. I mean, I've seen professional players struggle with this, and it's totally in their head because they've executed the shot a million times. And I've had it over the course of in the middle of a match where I was hitting one shot very well for maybe the first half of the match, went a little while without hitting that shot at all, and then now it's 9-9 in the third, and I had that same shot again, and I don't hit it the same way I did the whole match. And in my head, maybe you just put a little bit more thought into that one pointer. You separate that shot and put it on a pedestal above all the other ones, saying, oh, this one's the important one, and then you treat it differently. And and for me personally, I felt that is taking the consequence out of the equation really helped. So a lot of times you miss or you overthink it because you're so afraid to make that error. But for me, I just when I'm playing, obviously there's some points that end up being more important than others by sheer momentum. And so, there could be a big point at a certain time where the players are really stressed and could be a really long rally and you might get very unlucky and it just saps all that energy out of you. But for the most part, every point throughout the entire course of a whole match, they all count for 1 point. They're all the same. I'm one of those people. I have to stay positive or it could go downhill really fast, and I'm working on it, trying to get better at it. But for me, lately it hasn't been so much dwelling on just a certain key points, but just treating them all equally and saying, hey, the fifth point in the match counts the same amount of points as the last point of the match. But I just think the moment gets to some people, they all of a sudden put too much emphasis on a certain point or a certain shot. And I think the best players, those Roger Federer types, the Kobe Bryants, I mean, Ben Johns does it really well in pickleball, where they just treat every point like it's important, but not the end of the world. So they it's obviously important, they're focused, but it's okay to miss sometimes as long as it's a calculated risk. And those are the players that I think are just the toughest to beat, the robots that just are just so steady. They don't get up and down. They don't get hyped and streak and get hot and then cool off and start playing bad. They keep their attention span really level. And
Yeah.
I don't know how they do it because I'm a pretty emotional person, especially when I'm playing. But I'm working on it. But I mean, do you think that's probably a factor? They just put too much importance on a certain couple points or a certain couple shots.
Dude, 100%. So like I can't remember the coach's name, but the way he summarized it is exactly what you're saying. So he said, instead of thinking about like winning the game, he said, make every point perfect. So instead of like thinking of this making the idea of the game and the match so big in your head, like shrink it down and make every point perfect. And it's exactly what you're saying. And yeah, like nerves and anxiety and just people's personalities. I'm a very emotional person too, man. And it definitely shows on the court. And then you look at some of the people who excel really well. And you already mentioned it, Ben, right? For the most part, like him and Colin are very like level-headed and very like throughout the entire thing, they're just very baseline. They don't go too high, don't go too low. If you hit a net cord on Colin, he will definitely freak out. But
Who doesn't? Who
yeah.
doesn't get upset by that? I understand completely.
Yeah, but yeah, you just look at the level-headed people, like even Etta Wright. Etta Wright is another person that comes to mind. Like she's very just
solid mentally.
Rock, yeah.
I've had some talks recently, and I had to explain too, because sometimes talking about it with others helps me, because I recognize it off court, but then I get in the heat of the moment, and it still kind of trickles in. But there was a match I was playing recently, and it was really tight. It was like 9-9, and the other team gets like 2 net tippers at the very end and wins. And in my head, I'm like, oh, I got so unlucky. And I'm dwelling for hours afterwards how unlucky it was that I got 2 net tippers at the worst time in the whole match. And I dwell on that for a while, and then I realized, well, I did have a few of those on my end earlier in the match. And so I think sometimes people, again, for me, is just those last 2 points were the most important. But at the same time, for the course of the whole match, if I would have just been a little bit more consistent throughout the course of the match, maybe it wouldn't have been tied 9-9. Maybe I could have had a bigger lead and give myself a little bit more margin, some wiggle room there at the end for some of those. So and then finding a way to recover from those. I mean, it's tough, but in any sports, I mean, it's a game of inches, so that's going to happen. But the last thing you can do is sit there and dwell and, oh, woe is me, I got unlucky on 2 points. The match is like 11-9, 12-10 or something, and it's like you're worried about 2 points. It's like, so the last thing I want to talk with you, because you mentioned that you don't drill anymore, and you had a great video on that, and I feel like it ties in a little bit here on why you don't drill anymore. Do you still have that same sentiment, or are you out drilling some more nowadays?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. It depends on who I'm practicing with. There are people who subscribe to that mentality and that approach to training. For me, myself, if I already put out those videos, I have to like embrace it 100%.
Absolutely. So you can't flip-flop on us.
Yeah. But it's not just because I want to be like stubborn or prove a point. It's also just like, okay, what do I actually genuinely believe to be better or to be? Yeah, I think it's more effective. There isn't, like my coach Greg has said, there isn't a right or wrong way. There isn't only a way. It's just different options, right? So yeah, right now I just use game-based approaches. Anytime I can control the practice, I only use game-based approaches. Or constraints. The technical term is constraints-led approach. That's another, I guess, approach to practice under that whole umbrella of the ecological approach.
This would be just simulated point structures, or how does that work? What would a practice session for you look like?
Yeah, so like right now, something that's super important to me is just working on hands and working on attacking. Anytime someone attacks me in the chicken wing, I happen to like end up punching it this way, as opposed to like fading over, sliding, using my forehand. I tend to use a chicken wing punch a lot. It's a really bad habit. So I'm like, okay, how do we get out of this? So one game that I started to try to do is just we're on both sides of the kitchen. One person is assigned as an attacker. One person is assigned as just like the counter. So like only one person can initiate the attack. Okay, that's one constraint. That's still pretty open. So then I like drill down even more. Okay, whoever's attacking has to hit 90% of the balls to my forehand. The other 10% can go to my backhand, because you don't want the counter to just be sitting on a forehand the entire time, right? You have to add this like key principle of the ecological approach of the idea of variability. You need that will help with the skill development. So then we choose like one side, then we'll choose the other side. And then maybe you want to add another constraint that, hey, you can only attack off volleys, or you can only attack off the bounce. So you can use that. Those are constraints as far as like the execution of the movement. But like you said, like you had mentioned, you can also add constraints in scoring as well. Some people do like the 7-11 game. That's obviously like a very popular game. So yeah, there's different ways you can constrain things. It could be the position of the player or the performer. Yeah, whether it's indoors or outdoors, a certain ball, you could use a certain paddle. So yeah, there's different areas there.
Sure. I'm a big fan of scenario-based drills. So really just putting yourself in a real situation that you get on court, because I do see a lot of people that go out and practice and they drill. And that's kind of why I want to touch on this, because I agree with you. And people go out and drill and hit a certain shot over and over and over and over again and get really comfortable with that. But then they get put in a game and the shot doesn't quite look the same. You know, the returns come in differently, or with a different spin or different spot on the court. They might hit a little bit different situations. And it's like you just practice something for so long, and then you're in a game, you don't really execute it the same way. And so adding those variables in practice even is huge. So when I go out and drill, let's say I really want to work on my backhand dinks. Well, yeah, I might sit there for a half hour or so just grinding backhand dinks cross court, being consistent. But at some point, I do want to go 1-against-2 and have different angles to move that ball around. I don't want to just go cross court the whole time. Maybe I want to speed up and start attacking some balls. Well, I want to attack in spots that I would normally attack in a match. So I see people doing a lot of drills, and although getting the touches is great, it's hard to really put it in a real specific, realistic situation unless I love just 1v2 practices. One-on-one practice just doesn't give me the full effect, like I'm getting picked on in a game. So when you mentioned you don't do drilling anymore, I kind of had a feeling that that's what you meant, where as long as you're doing drilling in specific ways that is actually helpful, instead of just getting repetitions on something that you might not need to be that dialed in for, it is huge. And that's come from someone who's been playing for 10 years. But I think most newer players, I think, would agree that just I love playing like skinny singles, for example, but also there are some constraints that I don't like that aren't really realistic in a real game. So for me, it's just I want to be put in a real situation, not just boring. It's like going to the gym and just curling all day. It's like, yeah, my bicep might get strong, but there's so many different ligaments and stuff around. I need different exercises. I need to go out and actually lift real things. Just doing just the basic exercise and workouts doesn't really give you the full effect, in my opinion. I mean, I assume you'd agree.
Yeah, man. When is your next? When's the next Kyle Yates pickleball camp, man? Dude, all that stuff you described, I can't imagine. I've never heard anything about like your teaching or anything, or your lessons, but I imagine they're solid, man. That's dope.
We get into some stuff, that's for sure. We dive into that's why I was really excited to talk to you, because I know you think of sports on that other level too. You really get into it. It's a lot more than just hitting balls. That one of my coaches back in the day said that he said pickleball is 95% cerebral, and once you understand that, you'll be a better player. That you could be in as physical shape as you want to be, and you could be as athletic as you want, but most of the game is played up here. Whether that's even just your brain sending signals to your muscles to do what they need to do, but also the strategy and the mental stuff and emotion, everything on the court. I mean, it's all in your head. And that's sports, and I think that's what really separates some of those top players, is to be able to separate themselves on that other level, that focus level, and the ability to adapt. And there's so much to it, and we don't have time to get into it today, but I'd love to talk to you more about all that stuff. But for you, I mean, software designer for a big company, I might add, chef, MMA fighter, now pickleball YouTuber. I mean, with your background, how has that really influenced your approach to media and sports? And because obviously you must think really deep into these other topics too, and obviously baking and fighting and software, computer work. I mean, they seem so different. How does that influence you and how you think on everything else? I mean, in life or in sports?
That's a great question. Like the first thing that comes to mind is it just told me everything that I knew I didn't want to do. But like being a UX UI designer, of
Like go to
course.
school for sales.
Yeah.
Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, like UX UI
college
design.
that I did, I promise.
Yeah. It's all in many ways, all three of those things are very creative too. They have some creativity aspect to it. Being a UX UI designer helped me become more comfortable with technology and using apps, using applications and programs. Pastry cook, I don't know. That just told me like two things. One, I didn't want to wake up at 4 a.m. to get into the kitchen at 5 a.m. anymore. And two, I didn't want to be paid below minimum wage anymore. So those are two things I realized I didn't want to do.
It's nice to have hobbies, especially hobbies that involve cake.
Yeah. Eating. Yeah, an MMA fighter. Yeah, I guess during my MMA career, social media wasn't that big then as far as being like an influencer, right? For like around like 2015, it was like very difficult to get traction, to get a following, to get sponsorships. So I did try many ways to get creative there, and that helped me get into where I am now as far as media, just becoming more comfortable with it. But I guess for my approach to social media, man, just I think it all starts like, what problem are you trying to solve? And that's how my podcast started. No one was talking about the stories of founders, of like why they started the business. What is it like being an entrepreneur? Which actually, now that I look back on it, I actually asked these questions selfishly. It was because I was becoming an entrepreneur and I didn't know these things. So I started asking them it. And then of course, once I got the players on, again, selfishly asking stuff about their career and like how they learn, how do they process tournament losses? What does practice look like? What were they doing before? And it made me become more comfortable with the journey that I'm on now. But yeah.
Sure. Well, things change, right? Things evolve. And look how much pickleball's grown over the years. So, I mean, back when you were, in MMA and maybe the YouTube game was kind of still pretty new, and that was back kind of when I was mostly doing my pickleball stuff, getting into it. It was like 2017, 2018. There's some YouTube videos of some matches, but it was really hard to get traction. The fan base didn't really have social media accounts, certainly not Instagram, and they didn't really watch YouTube much. So the climate of the sport was so different, and it sounds like similar with MMA, where now it's gotten pretty big. Do you still watch MMA at all? Do you watch any of the UFC fights ever?
Yeah, I still keep up a little bit. I'll watch those like clips that someone in Russia had like illegally posts on Instagram, and they'll like clip the entire fight. It's like a highlight. But yeah, I'll still watch it every now and then. I haven't ordered a fight in a while, but what about you?
I watched a little bit just for fun. I mean, the Poirier Makachev fight the other day was pretty good.
Yeah.
So it's okay. Yeah, I like to follow some, but I would never get in the cage with it. I just like to enjoy it from the TV. But no, it's again with the sport changing, right? Pickleball grown so much. I mean, you look at some of the technology with the paddles, it's improving. And for me, it's I've been playing for about 10 years now, but also I feel like I'm still so new to the game because of how quickly it's evolving. I'm constantly having to add new shots, work on new things to keep up. So many new younger players coming in, and so with just that concept is people, we get on this path and we get stuck on doing something for so long, and then having that deliberate mental effort to focus and try to do something new. So with the game evolving so much, it does take quite a bit of deliberate mental effort, like we talked about earlier, to adapt, to analyze what's going on, figure out what needs improving, what problems to solve, and then make that effort to kind of go down that path. So you saw a need for some YouTube content in pickleball, and I love your videos. I think they're probably the best on YouTube right now about pickleball. If you want to learn a little bit more about your game and how to improve, awesome. And you actually had some great interviews with some of the pros, with Ben Johns and Colin John Simone. And what was it like getting to pick some of those pro players' brains about some of these things? I mean, are they kind of on the same level as you?
Absolutely nerve-wracking, dude. Like,
oh come on, they're just kids. What about Simone?
Yeah, I knew about the event like a month ahead, and all I could think about was like, what would I ask these people? Mostly because they've already done a lot of interviews, right? So it's like, what can I ask them that they haven't talked about already? So fortunate enough for me, they like the Johns brothers had their loss against Daescu and Cardio, so that's a great thing to talk about. And then they have the paddles, which made it easy. And Simone, hers was really interesting. I actually really enjoyed her conversation because I feel like she said things about like age and acclimating her training and adapting her training based on how she feels. Like that's a point that we're all going to meet at some time, right? So like, how do we change the way we play pickleball based on our age and our constraints?
Awesome. Yeah, it's Simone is a perfect example. So I'm glad you got to interview her because she, from what we've talked about so far, it would be a fantastic person to brainstorm with because she, again, being 20 something years older than most of the players she's been against and still competing and winning and grinding and the struggles that she has to deal with. I mean, with injury, she's had injuries and all sorts of things. So she has different struggles and challenges than a lot of these other newer players. But the way that she's been able to adapt her game and grind, and she is so crafty, such a smart player, and so mentally solid. I mean, if there's anyone you want on your side of the court dinking at 10-10 in the third game, it's Simone. I mean, I I'm so I'm so happy I was able to play as much as I did with her because I learned so much from her. Just how to present yourself on the court and how to deal with adversity and bad calls. And again, I'm still trying to get better at it, but usually when I'm court with her, she is just so business, but also such a joy to play with. And that's kind of how I want it. I want to model my personality on the court after that. Is we're here to win, we're here to mean business, but also we're playing pickleball. Okay, so we're gonna do whatever we can to win, but at the end of the day, and we're playing pickleball. Okay, so we don't need to get so upset over little things. But the way that she's been able to adapt, and especially with a lot of the new paddles now, people are hitting so much harder. The game's getting more athletic. So for her to still be hanging on is impressive. But there's been a lot of issues with that very topic with the new paddles nowadays, and because of that technology increasing. I mean, what do you see happening with the sport? Do you think pickleball is just going to keep accelerating, or is there going to be someone putting the brakes on here pretty soon on some of this technological advancement, some of the growth, all these companies? I mean, it's kind of the wild, wild west right now. Where do you see it going from here?
That's a good question and somewhat terrifying because you're like, the PPA has become a monopoly of some sort. And I don't say that in like I guess monopoly does have a negative connotation. So hopefully they aren't watching this, but
they're watching everything.
Like it's out there, right? They bought Pickleball Central, they bought the pickleball brackets and tournaments, and that's great because they have funding now and they can probably accelerate the growth of some of those like businesses in a positive way. But I think where you draw the line is testing. Like testing can't be, from what I've heard, is they're partnering or planning on partnering with the organization that would be responsible for testing, and that just I don't know how to articulate that, but any better than just saying like that just can't happen. That's not in the player's best interests, in the businesses. Like at some point, you then like how much will they control of the businesses that are approved on that list, the businesses that sponsor the PPA or become sponsors of the PPA. I get it. They have a lot of cash and they want to grow the sport. And they're probably in a very difficult position. I don't understand. I don't know what those decisions are like, right? But they're just trying to find ways to grow the sport. So I don't know. Monopolies generally are never really good, but in life right now, we have monopolies on phones and technology with Apple, Google, and there's generally some type of governing body, but the governing body has to be completely separated. But I could go on a rant about this for God knows how long, but I think even governing bodies can be corrupted as well. So yeah, it's very tough.
All right, fair enough.
What do you think, man? You're an OG of the sport, dude.
I've given my opinion plenty of times if people know where to look. But I think some of these governing bodies, now that there's really two official ones, USA Pickleball and UPA. But I do feel like the PPA has done a lot of positive things for the sport. I know as when I was younger and I was just getting pickleball, the opportunity to play professional pickleball was what I thought would be beyond reach, and the fact that it's gotten there, and kids nowadays are getting college scholarships to compete, and there's a lot more opportunities. It's very exciting. It's very exciting, but also I feel like at the same time, uh, you almost feel like you're climbing up an iceberg, and you're afraid that if you get too much weight on top, it might start tilting and then flip, right? It might capsize. So I'm really nervous because it is such a unique sport, and that's one of the reasons why I loved it. But it's getting so mainstream now. I'm curious where it's going to go, but with the whole paddle debacle lately, it's just a mess. I've been trying to stay out of it. I've been getting away from professional tournaments, teaching a lot more, but I do miss competing, so I might jump out there with a better attitude and go compete and just enjoy it. But it's wild to see where it's going. But sometimes you work on something for so long and you have a path and you have to diverge whether you want to or not. But I think having the ability to figure out what exactly you want and to be able to work any environment, especially one like pickleball, it's the wild west right now. It takes a special skill. It takes a little bit of luck, finding your niche in this crazy community. So I'm happy for you. You find that niche. I'm sure you're still evolving as a content creator and as a person, an athlete. There's a lot more to do, but it's crazy. It's hard to keep up with.
Come back to competing, man. Teach these kids what the Yates is, man. Where it came from, dude.
Call me grandpa. We'll see. Last little thing, you were down at the Dallas PPA, right? Last week. How was that experience? Have you been to a few of those before?
Yeah, that's a good question, man. I've only been to like a handful, not a whole lot. Like the local ones here. I haven't been to too many of them. But
you're in Texas, right?
Yeah.
Maryland to Austin.
Yeah, it's cool, man.
Like John's.
Huh? Oh yeah. See that orange Tesla rolling around.
So you were down at the Dallas PPA tournament watching the pros. Have you been to a few of those tournaments? What is that experience like, getting to watch some of those pros down there?
Yeah, it's cool, man. I've only been to the ones where like mostly where my friends are at, like Pickleball Studio, Pickleball Will, and Braden and Chris and all them. But the pro
shout out to Pickleball Will and Braden.
Yeah. It's been great, man. The PPA has been super kind and generous as far as like letting me take photos and videos, which is awesome. Hats off to them for just like being very generous in that regard. It's super cool. Like, yeah, the employees, they seem like very happy and cool. And then as far as like the games, it's great because watching it in person is completely different from watching it online and watching the streams. And of course, like the streams, that's a whole nother side tangent, but the streams aren't the greatest either. But watching it in person, like the ball looks completely different. People's movements, like this past one, like Federico Stackstrud and mixed against the Johnsons, is crazy how little that guy moves, and just like every ball is perfect. And something that the casual viewer doesn't see is how close the net is here. Each ball is like right here. Like that ball is barely getting over. You're just like, how do they do this like time after time after time?
It's so hard to fully appreciate it if you're not there live. It's a different animal. Like being courtside at an NBA game, you just don't realize how fast that ball's moving, how how quick those players are, and how accurate they are. And it's amazing. It's fun to watch. I've been doing this a long time, and it's just every tournament I'm impressed because people just keep getting better and better. Do you compete? I mean, do you play tournaments at all? What's your game like?
Yeah, I compete probably at like the 4-5 level. I'm like a low tier 4-5. Like so I do like local tournaments. I want to do more PPAs. So if anyone's looking for a men's or mixed partner, 4-5. So trying to do more competing. There's no like financial motivation or anything or prize. It's just like, we just love competing, right? Like you wouldn't have been doing this for 10 years if you just didn't love competing.
That's all it's about. Back in my day, we would travel across the country and compete for no prize money. It was literally just for bragging rights and practice, because you needed to travel to find other good players to compete against. So we would travel every weekend, pay our way, win a tournament for a little plastic gold medal, and then we would just play rec games all afternoon after the tournament was over. So nowadays, I'm hoping that the money and everything doesn't spoil it. I think the amateur experience is still great. It's fun to just go see everybody and compete and have a good time, and that's really what it's about. So nowadays, with the level that I have to compete at, it's just so serious, and it's a career, it's a job for a lot of these players. For someone who really just kind of wants to go out and enjoy themselves, it's a lot of work for me. I'm hoping my rating goes down low enough I can start playing amateur events. It's a lot more fun, less stressful, but we try to have a good time anyway. But for someone like, because you didn't really play racket sports growing up, did you? I mean, did you play a little tennis, ping pong, anything before pickleball that resembles pickleball in any way, shape, or form?
No, my parents tried to get me into that stuff. Like we had a ping pong table in the basement of the house. My brother was actually the tennis player. I couldn't get into either of them. I was
You
very
sound just like Ben Johns. From Maryland, I had a ping pong table in the basement. My older brother was the tennis player. Like, dude, that's hilarious. So there's potential for you. You fall in his footsteps, you'll be all right.
yeah. I just need to. Yeah, I got it. I got it down.
I love it. I love it, especially pickleball too. You get these people who have these crazy careers, these awesome stories, these interesting backgrounds. They eventually find pickleball and it totally changes their lives, and it just consumes you. These pickleball people, when they're not playing pickleball, they're talking about it, and when they're not talking about it, they're probably eating something pickleball related. So I love it. I love meeting some of these people. You're awesome. I love picking your brain. We'll definitely chat more about some of these things. It's just fun meeting some of these people with these awesome backgrounds. MMA fighter, chef, software designer, now pickleball addict. I love it. Thanks for spending some time with us, Brian. It was great getting to know you.
Dude, thank you, man. And just want to say how lucky I am that Kyle Yates finally gave me a follow on Instagram.
Today, right before this, I got to look up who this guy was. Just teasing.
No,
Hey,
thank you
thanks so
very
much.
much for your time, man.
Oh, you're great. Yeah, if you guys want to check out the Building Pickleball on YouTube, is there anywhere else you want to plug before we go?
YouTube, man, that's it. Shout out to my sponsor, Viori, and yeah, YouTube all day. YouTube and Instagram, just put in Building Pickleball, and don't forget to go to kyleyates.pb to give him a follow. Go check out his camps.
Yeah. All right, thanks, Brian. Thanks, everybody.